Okay, it's a quarter of. My name is Jay Lair. I'm Science Director of the Heartland Institute, a job I've had now for 11 years. Very exciting. There were 8 people on staff when I joined, and to see our growth and the number of people following our lead and coming to this conference is truly rewarding. I'm excited about this morning because I'll learn as much as you all about forecasting and the subject that we're going to tackle. We're going to be here for an hour and a half. We have 3 presenters who will each take no more than 25 minutes to present their material, and then we'll have 15 minutes for discussion at the end, maybe a little more if people go short. We'll keep very good time. There's a giant clock here on the podium, and the speakers will also get messages that they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes left. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker, J. Scott Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong is at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a Princeton guy, so I don't generally feel positively toward other Ivy League schools, but Scott is amazing. He has told me he's been at Wharton for 40 years, and I didn't think he was even 40 years old, so we've got an amazingly fit individual. Scott has been active in forming a variety of forecasting organizations and forecasting websites, and quite obviously his background is in economics and business forecasting, and he obviously got interested in the climate forecasting when he recognized the incorrectness of the ability of Al Gore and his acolytes to forecast temperatures 100 years down the road using science that did not make sense to him, and he has challenged Al Gore on the way they do business, and that is going to be the subject of his talk this morning. Scott Armstrong.
Thanks, Jay. You left out an important point, though. I actually know very little about climate, so I'm fortunate to work with Armstrong Green, who actually does know a lot about climate, and also with Willie Soon, who knows an amazing amount about climate. I'm going to talk about the role of methodology today. When you go to this conference, you'll hear a lot about the inputs that people are using, what type of data they're using, the fact that measurement changes over time, the fact that there's errors in measurement. You hear a lot about relationships, CO2, solar, and so forth, the direction and effect of variables. So Keston and I are not really going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a different angle on this, and I think is taken by the rest of the conference, and that is how do people put all these things together? What's the forecasting methodology? How do you come up with an expected value and prediction intervals and use this for policy analysis? So it's broken into 4 parts. The first part, a brief part where I'll talk about structuring the forecasting problem. Then I'll also talk about auditing the forecasting process. I'll get started on how to select the proper forecasting method, and then Keston will take over on that, and he'll also talk about forecasting validity, testing forecasting validity. So here's the basic problem. I view this whole thing as a forecasting problem. If you're going to make rational public policy, you need scientific forecasts of direction and magnitude and confidence intervals for, first of all, for the climate change itself. And next, for the effects of the climate change, the costs and the benefits. Are we now at the optimal climate, or would it be better off if we were warmer or colder? And then if you think there's a problem, you need scientific forecasts for the effects of alternative policies. we've been unable to find a single scientific forecast to support global warming, or global cooling, for that matter. That's in a paper by Keston and myself and Willie Soon. You'll find a list of the references on the materials we've handed out already. That's the Green, Armstrong, and Soon paper. And we're still searching for scientific forecasts on items number 2 and 3 here, and we haven't been successful. So if you're aware of any scientific forecast, let us know. Here are the handouts that we ran out near the back of the room, so there's plenty up front. There's references for our talks. There'll be on the back of that, there'll be a solicitation for ideas. Now, that's one of the main things I want to tell you about is I don't know much about climate change. I depend on Keston and Willie, but your job today is to help me and to provide lots of comments. So we do have a comment page you'll come to on where you're sitting. There's a page there on my new charity wager with Barbara Boxer on polar bears. A little bit about the Gore versus Armstrong prediction market. But where we really need your help is on studies that we're really getting underway on. One is analogies. We're trying to come up with analogies that are similar to this climate change hysteria. We're looking for action steps with respect to the World Wildlife Fund false advertising. And we're also looking at the, sort of the forecasters look at the CO2 policy. There's also a handout there on climate change forecasts are useless for policy. So that's the structuring part. Now we're into the auditing of the forecasting process. The IPCC says that they don't really do forecasts, they do projections. And we heard Kevin Trenberth talked about this. I had a little checklist I kept down every time you'd say forecast and predictions. It's all through there. He says forecasting and predictions all the time. So we audited the IPCC Chapter 8 on forecasting, and we found that they violated 72 forecasting principles. We concluded that these are forecasts by scientists. They're not scientific forecasts. They also had no evidence on predictive validity. And that is the Green and Armstrong paper from 2007. We did also an audit of the polar bear population forecasting. Polar bear population has grown. It's hard to tell how many polar bears there are, but the general thinking is that it's grown in recent decades, and probably because of restrictions on hunting. Now, the government did, I guess it was 9 reports. They forecast that, well, they assumed that global warming is a correct forecast, and then they assumed that this would reduce sea ice, and then they analyzed 5 years of data. Well, actually there was 6, but it was an outlier, so they used 5 years of data and related the extent of sea ice to polar bear population. And on the basis of A and B, they were able to forecast a rapid decline in polar bear population over 50 years. They then assumed that if they used the endangered classification, they would save the polar bears. There was no forecast for this. There was no forecast for any alternative policies. The results of our audit were that only 12% of the proper forecasting procedures were followed. I don't know about your job, but there's a lot of jobs where if you follow only 12% of the proper procedures, you wouldn't last long, like airline pilots, for example. We got in contact with government researchers and said, we have some questions, could you help us out? And would you review our paper, a little bit of prior peer review? And they said no, they weren't going to answer any of our questions. However, they said, when you submit it to a journal, we'd be happy to be reviewers. So we submitted it to a journal, and we suggested them as reviewers, and they refused to review. We also the journal invited them to write commentary on our paper, and they might do that, but they haven't gotten around to it yet. That paper was published in 2008, Armstrong, Green, and Soon. Here's an example. I talked about violations of principles. They use very complex mathematics to forecast the polar bear populations. So we asked them, well, where's the data? Could you send us the data that you used? And here they are. Here's the data. I think they said they were using it. I'm not sure. But I think they said they were using the data and could not send it.
Yeah, that's right. They were busy with the data.
Yeah. The current polar bear situation is we're lacking any scientific forecasts. So they went ahead and classified the polar bears as, well, not endangered, but threatened, intermediate step. So I'd like to announce the Boxer Armstrong charity wager now. I sent a note to Senator Barbara Boxer. Based on the forecast which she said she believed, she went around at the end of the Senate hearing and checked with everybody that they agreed. She didn't ask me, but everybody agreed with the forecast. And it implies about a 23% decrease in the polar bear population over the next 10 years. I picked 10 years because I want to be around, Jay, to see the end of this thing. We, looking at what we knew about the situation, concluded that there's a lot of uncertainty and polar bears have apparently been increasing, so we forecast no decline. So I challenged her to a $5,000 charity wager on the polar bear population for the next 10 years. Now, what's really interesting is we don't really know how many polar bears are out there. It's not counted very well, so I thought we should have a two-person panel that would convene to try to decide whether polar bears had increased or decreased, and I'm happy to go along with whatever they say. So here's Senator Boxer's response as of March 8th. On to the next policy is the global warming forecasts. The World Wildlife Funds, I was amazed to see this. I'm watching television, working out, and all of a sudden I see this ad come up, and it was an ad from the World Wildlife Fund. They're trying to get members, and because, you know, in your lifetime, your children will no longer see polar bears. They know this from forecasts about global warming. Well, we don't know that because of the paper that Armstrong, Green, and Soon did, but they don't know it either because we checked on their website and we found this statement that we don't know how many polar bears there are and we don't know if they're increasing or decreasing. So to me, that looks like false advertising if you not only contradict the empirical evidence, but you contradict what you say on your own website. So here's where I want to see you get started on that page we passed around. I think this clearly meets the definition of false advertising. There are damages that have been caused. I contacted, since December 12th, I've been attempting to contact the CEO and various trustees of the World Wildlife Fund. I raised this issue, and I'd like to know, what's their explanation. And I offered to report on their position at this conference, and here's what they had to say. I've contacted like 8 trustees and the CEO. They're very hard to contact. No answers so far. Well, this raises another question. I imagine there's a lot of organizations that are engaged in false advertising relative to global warming. So what can we do about that? So load us up with all of your ideas about that. So as you'll see, that page has 3 different areas we're going to ask for your inputs. The next stage is to talk about selecting a forecasting method. And here we're trying to select forecasting methods that we know from prior research about forecasting has some validity in situations like this. talk briefly here about expert judgment as a method of forecasting, extrapolation methods, and causal models, and look at how these methods, are they appropriate or not, with respect to expert judgment. This is one of the most astounding findings. I don't think people believe this. I'm sure that the warmers don't. I'm not even sure that people in this room believe it. You take a group of very intelligent people, you give them all the latest evidence and data, and you let them make forecasts in situations involving high complexity and high uncertainty. Those forecasts are worthless. These people have immense confidence in what they say. They'll tell you how confident they are, like on the bailout for the government. They tell you exactly what's going to happen with the bailout. People who know all about climate change are sure that, warmers or coolers or skeptics, they're sure that their expert opinion is useful. And yet, since 1930, there's been a stream of research. I originally summarized this in my long-range forecasting book in 1978, and then Phil Tetlock comes along with just this amazing book where he followed, I guess thousands of experts in politics and economics over a 20-year period. They made, just tons of forecasts, and he found that college students can do as well as experts. Simple rules do better. So expertise is of no value. And this applies when we're talking about accuracy, is the expert's forecast accurate? It applies to their statements about how confident they are. They are of no value. And it doesn't matter if, you have 30,000 people agree. It's of no consequence. Key thing about judgmental forecasting is if you use structure, you gain. So we looked at a number of areas to structure things. One is the Delphi procedure, prediction markets, which are now gaining a lot of interest, structured analogies, and causal models. So I'll go into those briefly. Delphi is a multi-round survey taken, use unbiased experts, or at least experts with different biases. They make, each of them makes an anonymous forecast. They get feedback between rounds as to what their prediction was and the reasons that people had for making their decisions. This all assumes that the experts can make useful forecasts. And Keston and I have done some research where we found that where experts have actually no ability to forecast, then it doesn't matter if you get a whole bunch of them and average them or use Delphi and so on. But it might. It also helps to assess in an objective way, what do experts think about the situation? So prediction markets have been used recently, you've probably noticed, with respect to the political elections. So along with Andreas Graefe, Keston and I are working on an application of the use of prediction markets, first to assess whether expert opinions are of any value here in forecasting climate change, but more interesting to find out, what do people believe? We're looking at things like if individuals can't forecast, does combining help? Is the market useful when you're talking about long-term bets? Maybe a series of short-term bets would be more useful. Is play money accurate? There are prediction markets that use play money, and there's prediction markets that use real money. Might people manipulate these things? I mean, if the warmers find out about our prediction market, maybe they might descend on it and place lots of bets on Al Gore. These predictions, we're currently using one called HubDub, just as a test market, and they take things from the news and put them on there, and people bet on them. Here's one that was up there recently. It's, when will man-made global climate change be disputed by a major media outlet? And they have to say exactly how they measure it, so they give half a dozen different, like New York Times and so forth. And then the betting right now is that 28% of the people think this will happen by the end of 2009. On the other hand, then there's a whole range of estimates, and 27% believe it won't happen until after 2018 or never. So we conducted this via a prediction market, this Gore versus Armstrong bet. The idea is, can we stimulate more interest in how to validate alternative methods to forecast climate change? I know Al Gore keeps talking about his interest in science. So I told him about this prediction market, and I've asked for his comments and suggestions, and here's his response. Progress on prediction markets so far, what we've done, we assume that Al Gore took the bet, and we used 10 years, starting January 1st, 2008. I'm forecasting no change in global mean temperature. He's implied that global mean temperatures would change at least as rapidly as what the IPCC said in their 1992 projection, which called for 0.03 degrees centigrade per year increase. And we'll use mean absolute errors of the annual forecast over that 10-year period. Right now, I'm ahead, 62%. I think that's an underestimate. I think it should be up around 80, but you can locate it on that URL, which we have listed on the handouts. People are invited to participate, and we're going to extend this to, this is a play money market. We'll be extending it to other markets also. We're going to use alternative criteria. We specified University of Alabama, Huntsville, but we could also specify in terms of Hadley. We're going to use real money sites. We're going to add information via comments. We're going to try different time horizons. We're also going to compare this with a Delphi expert panel to see how they match up. And that's the paper by Grayfay, Armstrong, and Green. Draft needs help. So we're ready to move on to Keston now.
Thanks, Scott.